Hi, and welcome to the Punk CX podcast. My name is Adrian Swinsko, and I'm an advisor, best-selling author, speaker, and general explorer when it comes to customer and employee experience. I'm really interested in figuring out what it takes to build organizations that produce better outcomes for both customers and employees. So with that in mind, I seek out and interview CEOs, entrepreneurs, business and tech leaders, authors and academics to uncover some clues about what it takes to build such an organization. Now, some of you may know the podcast as the Rare Business Podcast, but I decided to rename and rebrand the podcast recently. This is for a number of reasons. First one was to mirror the title of my book, Punk CX, which was published in June 2019. Two, because I'm a fan of punk music. And three, it's just more fun, right? Anyway, if this is your first time listening to one of these interviews, then hello and welcome. And please do dive into the archives at adrianswinsko.com, as I've now completed over 300 of these interviews in the last few years. If this is not your first time listening, then welcome back and thank you. Anyway, that's enough for me right now. Let's get into the interview. So welcome to the next edition of the Punk CX podcast. With me today, I have, old friend, possibly lurker on the on the podcast. Kind of maybe has he got pointy elbows? I don't know. But anyway, we had him on recently, and we're having him on again because guess what? Peg has done something kind of interesting again, and we want to talk to him about. So, Don Sherman, the CTO of Vice President of Product Marketing at Pega. Hello, welcome again.
It is always good to be back.
So, I'm pretty sure there are some people that might be listening to this to my podcast for the first time. So, Don, for the benefit of those newbies, can you kind of introduce yourself and kind of Pega so we get a thumbnail sketch, an intro?
Sure. So I sort of sit at the intersection of technology and our clients at Pega, right? So I spend about 50% of my time working with our clients, really making sure that I understand what they're trying to achieve with their use of technology. And then I spent the other 50% of my time with our technology teams and our strategy teams, making sure that we're actually meeting those needs the clients are expressing. Mm-hmm. Pega, for those who aren't familiar with, is about a slightly over $1 billion software company. And we provide a low-code platform for AI-powered decisioning and workflow automation. And our clients, who tend to be pretty large enterprises and government organizations, use us sort of across their customer lifecycle. They use us to personalize their customer engagement, to accelerate how they onboard and acquire new customers, to automate large aspects of their customer service, to make the service experience better, to optimize the underlying operations that support all that customer service and product development. And then ultimately to resolve exceptions, to fix things when they go wrong. And lots of those end up being workflow problems. They end up being problems that you've got to make real-time decisions in order to better improve the experience. And that's where our platform and our capabilities come to bear.
Awesome. So thank you for that. And the reason why I kind of asked you about, because before you were on the podcast a couple of months ago or so, and we were talking about Pega Inspire, which we'll kind of come back to in the end, at the end of this. And that was kind of great. I attended that and that was really interesting. But you've also, as your want, because Pega is a bit of a machine when it comes to kind of doing research and surveys and all these different things. And the machine's popped out this kind of new report recently called Workforce Trends Report 2022, demystifying complexity in the modern workforce. And I was like, and I know that kind of Pega talks about crushing complexity. So this is right in your kind of like wheelhouse, as it were. So I wondered if you could tell me a little bit about the research and why you conducted it and what some of the main headlines are about it, because I think the complexity thing, there's some really interesting things that have come out of it. And I just wanted to get your take on it and what it kind of means, as it were.
Well, I think complexity is of interest to us because we tend to get involved when organizations have sophisticated or complex problems that they need to solve. But we also, I think there's this sense that unwittingly or not, the world, and especially the world around the technology that we use to serve our customers, support our employees, is frankly getting more complicated. Um, and in sometimes in our efforts to add powerful new tools to take advantage of new sets of information, we have to be careful that we're not actually stepping on the experiences of the customers and the employees that we're actually trying to make better.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we wanted to do with this report was sort of dig into that hypothesis a bit and see if there was any truth to it, see if there was some validity and data that we could collect from organizations, from employees about what they're experiencing, so that all of us can maybe learn a little bit better about how to approach digital transformation in a way that we're actually simplifying experiences as opposed to adding complexity to them.
And before we go any further, perhaps it'd be useful to define what we mean by complexity, because it's it's a big word. Well, it's not a very big word. It's how many? It is 7 letters, but it kind of means lots of kind of different things to lots of different people. So maybe you can help us by defining what you mean by complexity in this kind of organizational kind of context, as it were.
Yeah, I think we mean things that get in the way of employees and customers trying to get to the outcomes that they want.
Right.
Places where, and things that require our employees, our customers, our stakeholders to navigate processes, systems, information sets that require them to sort of figure out what's going on, as opposed to naturally take them to the outcome that they're looking to get to.
Right. Yeah. No, that makes sense. I mean, and so I wanted to dig into the report a little bit and actually to reflect on some of the findings. And one of the first ones was that, just because it's a bit like in big neon lights, it was like 42% of workers feel that digital transformation efforts have made their job more complex. And I was like, what? Because I thought the main objective of these efforts were to try to make things easier. Like to your point before, that was your hypothesis, right? So you had your hypothesis and then you went, yes. Yeah. I mean, I'm not sure what the grade would be on a report card in that respect. I'm not sure it would be maybe is it a pass? Maybe. So
yeah, I mean, and I don't, and I'm going to be careful. I don't think the lesson of this is that digital transformation is bad or a failure. I think it's important just to understand that it also has side effects, right? And it also that we should keep in mind. And I think part of it is that digital transformation is really just all about navigating change, right? And I would argue that digital transformation in and of itself doesn't actually have an end point. It's simply just establishing an organization, a way of working, a sets of technology that can continuously respond to what I think all of us would recognize is continually accelerating change that isn't going to go away. Right. So, but I think the important thing to then take that with is change by its nature is hard. It's complex. It's new things. And I think sometimes as we go through transformation, we think about applying technologies. One of the things that happens is we sometimes put in technologies to solve very particular problems or create new opportunities. But when we step back and look at the compounding effect of all of those, right, it can add complexity. I mean, the simple thing that I would say is email is a great technology, right? Great, allows me to communicate. Collaboration tools like Teams or Slack are great technologies. Sending SMS messages or iMessages on your phone, great technologies. You step back from that though, and now as an employee, like I find that during my day, I've got 4 or 5 different threads that I'm tracking conversations on and constantly needing to feel like I have to respond to and stay up to date and pull this information in. And so the individual technologies themselves are powerful, right? And impactful and valuable, but the combined effect of all of them
Mm-hmm.
is for me as an employee, is I got more complexity I got to deal with.
Yeah, I mean, that feels kind of familiar in that I remember a piece of research that you did a little while ago. We talked about that I talked to, oh, I can't remember who I talked to about it, but it was a piece of Pega research, and it talked about one of the main frustrations that both customer service agents and customers share is this idea that they have to repeat things because things aren't kind of like shared across kind of channels. And it's to your point, you're like, all these individual things are, yeah, they're good technologies in themselves, but if they don't knit together,
that's right,
respect the context and kind of like how they, and the use of things. So, because from a customer's perspective, they might be contacting people on a number of different channels, but in their mind, they're only really having one broad conversation with you. And if the organization can't knit that together, then that's not their problem. That's the organization's kind of problem. And that's the complexity they have to deal with, which then you manifest itself in real time in that conversation.
That's right. And the employee becomes oftentimes the person who is actually solving that problem for the customer. Mm-hmm. So they become the glue to connect it all back together, which means they've got to navigate the sort of complex world of this, right? And I think part of that also has to do with, I think that we've made some mistakes, or I've seen some mistakes in digital transformation. And one of those that you just kind of spoke of is this real sort of channel-centric approach, right? Where we're going to stand up a mobile app, or we're going to put in place a chatbot. And the chatbot in and of itself is really cool. The mobile app in and of itself is beautiful and really powerful. But if it's not a participant in the larger servicing workflow or experience workflow, and it isn't coherently attached to common decisions that we're making consistently across the customer lifecycle, then once the customer leaves that nice protected environment and moves to the next one, that's when the complexity, that's when the sort of jarring and friction of the experience begins to show up.
And did the survey uncover sort of what sort of impact that is having on not only kind of customers, but also kind of employees, and uncover some of the things of what were employees saying about that?
Yeah, I think I think that, and this latest survey really focused on employees, right? But there was definitely, people were talking about one impact to the work-life balance, right? And I think 31% of the women that we surveyed, indicated that the sort of hybrid work world that we have entered has created this huge, impact on their ability to maintain balance between work and life, right? And I think we've all felt that over the past couple of years. And I think there's also this feeling a little bit that the complexity is accelerating, right? So, 1 out of 3 workers reported that their jobs are more complex today than they were 3 years ago. So I think that also creates this sort of sense of a little bit of like, you're sitting at the top of the roller coaster looking down, right? And not quite sure of sort of what's happening, what's going to happen next.
And does that change depending on your kind of like work arrangements, i.e. whether you're office based or you're fully remote or you're kind of hybrid? I mean, is the complexity just uniform across the piece, or does it go up and down depending on your situation?
Well, so I don't think it's surprising, but I think, what we found is hybrid workers feel this more directly than all remote or all on-site.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I think that part of that is just due to the nature of, if as I've started to experience it, sort of hybrid work, right? Which is, it now creates this yet another set of things like, okay, well, do I go into the office today? And if I go into the office today, who am I going to meet? And is my boss going to be in the office today? What day is my team in the office this week? And should I plan to be in there for that particular day? And is this meeting worth going in, or should I just take this meeting remote? Like it introduces these whole new sets of, again, questions and thinking that we now need to go through.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's, that creates this feeling of complexity.
It's fascinating because when you say that, because with a client, we've just, all of our work has been, virtual, remote for the last couple of years. Prior to the pandemic, it was largely face to face.
Yeah.
And then it all went remote. And then last month or so, we did a hybrid arrangement. So some people were still remote, and then some people were in the office, and we did this hybrid workshop sort of thing. And oh my word, did we have to spend a bit of time figuring out, how are we going to get this right? How are we going to get people involved? What's the technology that we need to use that kind of like that's going to make this kind of all kind of like happen? And you're absolutely right. It's like this. It adds it's not just a Venn diagram where there's an overlap between kind of remote and face to face. It's almost like it's a whole thing in of itself. And I was just like, well, yeah, sometimes it felt like I was like going, my head's overheating, thinking about all the different dimensions of it.
Well, it kind of reminds me to, I think it was both Steve Jobs and Barack Obama spoke about, the reason Steve Jobs always wore the black mock turtleneck, and Obama, when he was president, basically had like 2 gray suits that he would cycle through. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that they were talking about is part of it was just eliminating decisions that they didn't need to make in their life, right? Like, mm-hmm. I don't need to get up and figure out what I'm going to wear this morning. I'm going to put this on and it goes, right? I think in some cases, especially with hybrid, we've just increased the number of decisions that we need to make. Right? Like, there's so much more thoughtfulness and thinking and that you need to take into operating in this hybrid world that you didn't have to do when it was just, I get up in the morning and I drive into the office and I have my meetings with people. Or I'm a remote employee. I get up in the morning and I log in and I take the meetings with the people I meet with, as opposed to now every single one of those is sort of fraught with decisions about how you best engage what's always going to be a dispersed team.
Mm-hmm. So I guess, so we know that the people are suffering from complexity that's gone up. It's set to increase, and it's having an impact on people, and it's making their job not necessarily easier, but sometimes more complex, not necessarily harder, but more complex. There's a lot more things to deal with. I mean, so what can we do to try and solve for this, or what should we be thinking about to make things less complex?
Yeah, I think part of it comes down to understanding, one of the things that we saw drove a lot of the complexity, right? And I think it was like 89% of folks talked about, navigating internal processes as driving complexity. Mm-hmm. And, not to get back into sort of the process re-engineering world, right, of 10, 15 years ago. But I do think there is something around stepping back and looking at the processes that our employees drive, our customers go through, and looking at them from an outcome-oriented perspective. Like, these processes all exist because we're trying to accomplish something. We're trying to get to some meaningful business outcome. Mm-hmm. And we often refer to this sort of this process that has a business outcome at the end as sort of a micro journey. It's like a small journey I need to go through on my day that gets me to a meaningful outcome. It's not my entire life cycle, but it's worth noting. Right. And I think finding those micro journeys that matter, right, both from a customer point of view, right, whether it's how a new customer gets onboarded, how a particular service request gets addressed, how an exception gets fixed, and from an employee point of view, right? Either I'm an employee who's helping a customer navigate that process, or their internal processes that I'm navigating as an employee. How do I streamline and design that micro journey so that it's focused on getting me to the outcome as fast and as efficiently as possible? Mm-hmm. And what if that can I automate? What decisions along the way can I minimize? How can I use, technology, whether it's workflow, whether it's service layers, so that the employee, the human, the customer doesn't actually have to go to the different systems to get the work done. The technology actually navigates that for them. And I think starting with that is really, really important. We often refer to that as sort of starting from the center out, right? You start with that micro journey, that definition of the outcome I need to get to. And then I figure out, okay, how do I interface that into a chatbot? How do I interface that into a website? How do I connect that into a mobile app? But the important thing is all those different experiences that I've built, they're all driving the same process. And
Mm.
as I hop and move between them, as people are wont to do, I'm not restarting, as we were talking about earlier. I'm just continuing this thing down what is hopefully a relatively streamlined path to the outcome
Yeah.
that I want. Um, and I think taking that approach and taking it, micro journey at a time is a really good way to start beginning to cut through some of the complexity that's out there.
So I think what that makes me think about is that this idea that when people talk about transformation, and often, and I think that's probably an inherent part of the word, and what it suggests is someone, they talk about transformation and they think big.
Yeah.
But actually, we're not really, as you alluded to, we're not really transforming, or we're continually transforming, which sort of intimates that we're evolving over time. Yeah. And the only thing that's really kind of transforming is these little micro things. So it's almost a bit like, forget the transformation in equals kind of big. There's actually the thing that you transform, you can easily transform, is the small thing. And in doing that, you just keep doing it, keep iterating one thing at a time. Then it becomes achievable. And then hopefully then you can start to see you can start to unknot some of the complexity that's inherently built into the system.
That's right. I also think that, the other big challenge with sort of the big approach is the target will move, right? There's going to be factors we can't control, right, that we're going to need to adjust to. And if you're iterating on smaller things, you build yourself naturally that ability to kind of pivot, move, rethink, right? That's why I think so many organizations in their technology and even how they run their business are adopting some form of agile, right? And you can go through all the different sort of models and philosophies of agile, but at the end of the day, I break a problem down into small chunks and I kind of iterate over small pieces, and I'm constantly redeciding what's the next piece I'm going to go tackle based on where the priorities of the business are at that point, right? And I think giving yourself the ability to do that is I think really important. But I think it's also really important that as you do that, you still focus on the micro journey. I think part of the problem, and you think about those micro journeys holistically, like what are the systems they need to work across? What are the channels that they need to plug into? Because I think part of the way that complexity gets added is when we drift away from these things that are tied to outcomes, and we say, okay, we're going to stick a chatbot on here, or hey, we're going to give you a new document management system to throw store your documents in. Well, but I now haven't built that around what's the actual outcome my employee is dealing with. So this now becomes a thing that they have to integrate into their outcomes, as opposed to we're being a little more thoughtful about what's the micro journey, what's the outcome, and how do I get you there as fast as possible?
Yeah. And surely it's kind of also important that because I've seen, you mentioned process re-engineering. I've seen that sort of done or approached in the past, where it hasn't really involved the people that are using the process, as it were, right. And things gets designed and then foisted on people, a bit like chatbots that were put in place without the input of anybody who's like a conversation kind of expert, right. i.e. the people that talk to customers kind of day in and day out, as it were, and they've never been involved in the design. You're like going, that feels like a bit of an oversight. So I think it's you should go to where, if you want to redesign something or identify the micro journey or redesign it, things, you have to go to the place where involve the people that are involved in that journey and using those processes. I would suggest.
Well, yeah, and I think that's one of the sort of not often expressed enough powers of low code, right? And this idea of low code technology, or allowing people who might not be traditional developers to get involved in the development process. I think it has a lot of low code is almost inevitable in the fact that we're not going to have enough developers to do all the stuff that we need to do. But I think the side benefit of low code is the fact that it actually lets the people who understand the process to put their hands on a keyboard and actually make the technology that's going to run the process and make it better.
Yeah.
Right. As opposed to these sort of layers of translation that ultimately end up, more traditionally. So I think, I think that's exactly right. Getting the people who really understand it involved and taking advantage of the fact that there's technology now that allows them to play a very, very active role in how these solutions get built.
And so I know this is really central kind of to what, you and what Pega are about, this, the low code approach and managing and tackling complexity. I mean, do you have any stories that you can share with us about some people that you've worked with and about what sort of approach that they've taken, or what sort of, say, micro journeys that they've kind of tackled, as it were, and how that's kind of, how they've gone about it and kind of how they've benefited from it, just sort of bring it to life, as it were?
Yeah, so and especially you mentioned earlier PegWorld Inspire, right, which was our customer event. So I'm always coming sort of out of that having heard afresh a number of customer stories, right? So we one of the clients that spoke there was Booking.com, right, they talked about really managing the service experience for people who need to book and make changes to travel, right? And how do they streamline and make that easier, both for the customers to do, but also for the employees who are assisting them, right? And I thought that was a great example of stepping back, looking at the experience from the customer perspective, from the employee perspective, and designing that micro journey in a way that really supports them. I think the other thing that you can see is that organizations, as they grow, begin to scale up this kind of approach. So one of the other organizations that spoke at PegaWorld was Lloyd's Banking Group. And they've kind of begun to build this whole program around how do they tackle each of these sort of core micro journeys and processes in their business and add simplification to them. And we've, one of the things that we've learned a lot from working with Lloyd's Bank over many, many years is that idea of simplification, of when I look at something, what can I do to simplify it? And the other sort of approach that's led us to involve with in a number of our clients is kind of taking a design thinking approach to workflow. Right? I feel that sometimes a lot of our process engineering efforts, like we do a lot of analysis of as is processes and to be processes, and we get very tied in the like current state of stuff, as opposed to taking that moment to step back and be like, well, what business reason does this process exist? What value does this add to the customer, to the employee? And given the known limitations around our current set of systems and regulatory obligations, et cetera, what's the fastest path I can get to somebody to get them to that outcome? And I feel like sometimes stepping back and looking at a process that way, again, how can I simplify this, becomes really, really important. And the clients that have been successful, like Lloyd's, they've taken that and put that front and center.
Yeah, I think if you think about design at its absolute purest, it's about solving problems.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's basically kind of asking yourself, what is the problem here? What really is the problem here? Yeah. Rather than that, what we do is, rather than jumping into the fix, as it were. So as you say, taking the moment going, what is it we're dealing with here? What does it really mean? What is it we really kind of like, we really want? And I wish, that requires a bit of, it's just doing different things, giving yourself a little bit of time and space. But I think it's an important topic about this idea about complexity, because and this quest for simplicity, because we are we're very capable of adding things, not so great at taking things away.
That's right.
And so to highlight it is a not just a current, it's not a current problem, it's just an ever existing kind of problem. it's never going to go away. We just have to keep on it.
Well, and if we're not careful, it's going to get worse, right? The thing that I would suggest is that there's every force that I can see in our business is going to make us more distributed and more complicated, right? The hybrid, remote, in-person work environment. The fact that we're now designing our technology with things like microservices, right? Which means that what used to be one application is now 50 different services that have to be orchestrated together, right? Really great from an application sustainability, maintainability, design perspective, but certainly not simpler, right? Like you look at the way that data residency laws are emerging and the fact that we're going to need to have all this data in our business increasingly distributed because certain pieces of data can't leave certain environments. And then the way in which the world is moving to be ecosystem driven, right? So more and more of the services that organizations provide are actually going to be partner driven, are going to be connections into their ecosystem so that that network of connections grows, right? And all of that basically means a more sophisticated web of stuff to manage. And so we definitely need to be thinking about how do we put in place the technologies that weave some of that complexity together into a fabric that is manageable for employees, that is manageable for customers.
Absolutely. It's we just definitely have to put it on everybody's radar. And so this is your watching brief, kind of like stay on it, because it's, as you say, it's not going away, and it's not going to get any smaller or easier. But so, Don, I wanted to kind of like, normally I ask these normal questions towards the end of these interviews. I mean, unless there's anything that you want to add that we haven't highlighted.
No, that's great.
Because I finish on some normal kind of questions to round things off. But what I wanted to do, you mentioned Pega World, Inspire, and I wanted to skip back from that because we hadn't really spoken since that. We spoke before it and since that, but I wanted to ask you about how it went. There wasn't any of you in a silver jacket bouncing around the screen like there was like a couple of years ago, and it was a bit more. It was just it felt like a Pega World Inspire in many ways, but virtually. So how did it go, and what was your highlight from the event?
So I thought the event overall, I felt was very successful, both from the client feedback, from how we felt about it. The one thing
can I interrupt and just say Joe Richardson and some of the kind of the intros and the MC and smashed it out of the park. She's ace.
You stole some of my favorite parts there, right?
Sorry.
But Joe's just a rock star, in addition to being just a simply delightful person, and a lot of that personality came through on screen. And I love events where you can see the personality, and we saw the personality of Joe, but I think we also saw the personality of a lot of our client presenters really shine through. I thought the client stories that we focused from T-Mobile and Booking.com and Lloyd's Bank were just wonderful. That said, I am ready, as I'm sure many of us are, to be back into a live world again, and not be doing these things virtually. So while I think we had a great Pega World Inspire event, I am really hopeful that we will have a Pega World in person in 2023.
Yeah, well, I hear. I mean, because I think there is an extra additional thing that you get from kind of that, where it's like, conversations in the corridors or whatever. So yeah, I look forward to that. But as you know, I tend to finish the podcasts on asking some punk questions, but given that you were on so recently, I'm going to dispose of that kind of right now. And also just want to try something kind of new, which I might continue. And because I was reflecting and just going, we've come out of a couple of years worth of, what I'm calling the pandemic years. And now we're emerging into a very odd sort of like kind of place. And lots of changes and challenges in the world. And, there's a lot of not great news stories floating around. And so I thought, wouldn't it be great if we could end on something a bit more positive. And so I wanted to ask you, what's the most interesting, positive, or exciting thing that you've seen in the last week? And we'll finish on a good news story.
So I'm going to give you two. One of which is, I think, it maybe has some relevance to our discussion, and the other one is completely not relevant.
Cool.
So, the relevant one is, I read a great article on Slate.com last week about the company OXO, OXO, and they make all the kitchen devices, right, that were initially designed to, facilitate easy use, right? And like their devices are so good that I think like the New York Times Wirecutter has a whole page that's nothing about their top OXO devices, right? Just that, And what was interesting was just reading about the philosophy of a company that takes design really, really seriously. Not in a flashy, we're going to build the most beautiful, cool thing, but we're going to build something that is incredibly functional, incredibly accessible, to users of any ability, right? And incredibly durable to, stand the test. And the thoughtfulness that goes into making that happen, and the pride that comes out of the work of the people who are able to do that. So I just found that to be a really interesting story. And you talk about sort of thinking about simplicity of design, right? This was a great example of what it takes to do that.
Nice.
The other thing that I will share is I'm spending the week down at Cape Cod this week, and so I took my dog to the beach this morning, and I will say that there is my dog. One of my dogs encountered a blue crab in a tidal pool, and it was just kind of delightful watching the dog kind of bark quizzically at this crab, and this crab kind of look up at the dog, and neither of them was going to do anything about the other, right? The dog wasn't getting anywhere near the crab, and the crab certainly wasn't going to make the dog go away. But it was just a wonderful kind of little start to the morning to watch that encounter. So I like those little moments, like
a micro moment.
Yeah, exactly.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that, Don. And thank you for sharing the complexity research with us, and we'll make sure that all gets linked up when we do the release the podcast and do the kind of the write up and things. But it's also thank you, as always, for spending some time with me and sharing your insight and sort of and your perspective with me. It's always a pleasure. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much, Adrian. I'm sure we'll talk again sometime soon.
Absolutely.
All right, bye-bye.
Well, that was cool. I hope you enjoyed it. I did, and I always do, actually, because I always learn something new when I speak to some of these amazing kind of people. And it's always something new that I can incorporate into my writing, speaking, workshops, and other sort of advisory work that I do. Now, if you're interested in learning about any of that sort of stuff, then you can find out more about how I work with clients over at adrianswinscoe.com. But one final thing before I go, please consider heading over to iTunes or Spotify or whichever podcast platform you choose to use, and do leave a review. Every little helps, as they say. Anyway, that's all for now. Thank you for listening, and do tune in again soon. All the very best. Cheers. Bye.